Hello, Catalyst family. Welcome to episode 9 of the Athlete's Journey podcast. Today, we have the treat of having Roni Sasaki on the podcast to talk about her journey as a Paralympic gold medalist, entrepreneur, and speaker. Roni Sasaki was born with only one leg. Her greatest struggle as a youngster was learning to love and accept herself for being different. Roni harbored a secret desire to become an Olympic athlete, and after various attempts at sports, became a one-legged skier on the United States disabled ski team. In 1992, she won a gold medal and 2 bronze medals at the Paralympics held in Albertville, France. Sasaki is a dynamic and entertaining presenter. She has converted her experiences on the slopes to valuable tidbits of wisdom that inspire business professionals to embrace their unique differences and achieve their goals and dreams. Roni Sasaki has successfully owned and operated Environment, an industrial supply company, since 1995. She recently published her first book, From the Start, Trusting God's Course for My Life. She is the host of the podcast, A Leg Up on Life, as well. Roni Sasaki, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Keith. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here too, as well, because when I was seeing and looking through some of your content and your videos, I was just incredibly inspired. So, can you talk to us about kind of your origin story in terms of where you were when you decided that you wanted to, get interested in sports and skiing for that matter?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, in my introduction, it talked about learning to love myself as a kid. But one of the
Hmm.
things that I just knew having one leg was going to ruin in my life
Hmm.
is that I would never really be an athlete. And I
Hmm.
wanted to be an athlete primarily because in my school, kids that were athletes were popular. And
Yeah.
I guess I was shallow enough to want to be popular.
Hmm.
And I thought if I could just prove to those other kids that I could do everything that they did, then I would somehow go up in the ranks of
Hmm.
popularity
Hmm.
or kind of be, I would have these fantasies in my own mind of showing up and nobody expected a one-legged girl to be able to jump that high or
Hmm.
run that fast or do any of
Hmm.
that. And all of a sudden I'd be given a new bionic leg, something, that would
Mm. Mhm.
catapult me into infamy, kind of these, I call them fantasies because it was
Mhm.
pretty crazy. But yeah, I wanted to be an athlete, and everything that I tried to prove, it's like people would say, "Oh, you're so inspiring," but I'd come in last, and I didn't
Mm.
want to come in last. I wanted, if I
Mhm.
was going to be inspiring, I wanted to come in first because of
Yeah.
it. I always saw that most inspirational is kind of like the best
Mm.
bench warmer
Mm. Mhm.
or the
Mhm.
the prize, the consolation
Right.
prize. And so I
Yeah.
didn't see it as a positive thing. I saw it as a negative thing.
Mhm.
Oh, poor Ronnie, she can't move as quickly or do anything that is good as the other kids, so we're going to just call her
Mm.
inspirational.
Mhm.
But if nothing else, that period of my life gave me a lot of determination to try and to learn and to grow. And in my efforts to do more and be more
Mhm.
athletic,
Mhm.
I I learned a lot about myself. Like I wanted to be a cheerleader and I couldn't do a
Mm.
split jump. So I
Yeah.
practiced for hours trying to move my artificial leg in such a way that when
Yeah.
I jumped up in the air, I could do the splits. And
Yeah.
I never could, but
Huh.
I was able to use my leg a lot better than I was before.
Okay.
So I grew from that experience.
Yeah.
So,
Huh.
I find that all the things that we strive for in our lives, even if we don't necessarily reach them at how we thought it should
Mm.
look,
Mhm.
benefits us in so many other ways
Mhm.
along the way.
Yeah. What do you remember about your parents during that time? Because I have to imagine that during that period of time, having a child and just the circumstances in general, right? Unfortunate in terms of like being born without a leg or just having one.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about your parents that was really encouraging or really inspired you to want to try or feel the freedom to try to push towards something like, skiing?
Yeah, well, it's funny. My parents, I have great parents, by the way.
Yeah.
They were devastated. They were very young when I was
Mm-hmm.
born. My mother was 21 and my dad was 22. So I always
Mm-hmm.
say they were barely older than kids themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, I was born in the early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a lot of support for parents with children with disabilities. And so they
Mm-hmm.
were kind of just sent home with this child. Doctor told my mom and dad that I would probably never walk, which was a crazy statement to make.
Mm-hmm.
With prosthetics and all.
Yeah.
And I was actually fitted with my first leg at age 2.
Mm.
So with nothing better to do and without knowing any better, I guess is what I really mean to say, they just treated me like a normal kid.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably the best thing they could possibly have done. They didn't try to hide me away. They were never
Yeah.
embarrassed or ashamed of my limb difference, as it's called now. We called
Yeah.
it handicap or, crippled child back in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just let me be a kid. They let me
Mm-hmm.
run and play with the other kids and fall and skin my knee with all the other kids. And they weren't pushy parents.
Hmm.
They didn't drive me to achieve, but somehow inside of me, I got this drive on
Mm-hmm.
my own, and they
Mm.
supported that.
Yeah.
I think there were times when they were afraid that I would, what is she going to do next? What is she going to try next? They they were a little concerned about that, but they
Mm-hmm.
never held me back and they never told me that I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So they were really good balance. I remember breaking my leg when I was 12. I was ice skating.
Hmm.
Again, picturing myself ice skating, thinking I can twirl around and ski, and oh, everyone's going to be so, or skate, excuse me, everyone's
Yeah.
going to be so amazed that this one-legged girl can do this. And my first time of putting ice skates on was this time when I was 12, and I could
Mm.
barely even stand up, clinging to the railing.
Yeah.
And I finally ventured out away from the railing and fell,
Mm.
hit my kneecap. So I was in this full leg cast.
Mm.
And I couldn't even wear my artificial leg because it just didn't work. I couldn't walk
Yeah.
at all. But my parents would prop me up to the sink to do dishes when it was my
Mm.
turn to do dishes. So
Oh.
instead of saying, "Oh, poor Roni, she's got a broken leg and she's only got one leg, she deserves to sit on the couch and
Mm-hmm.
watch TV while her brother
Yeah.
does the dishes," they're like, "No way. We'll figure out a way to get you over to that sink and you can do your
We're
turn of the
gonna help.
dishes."
Oh my gosh. That's, oh my gosh. It's like, no, you're not gonna get out of this one.
Yeah. So, they were great parents, and
Yeah.
I'm very um I'm so happy that they were my parents and that I had those
Mm-hmm.
experiences, because again, you talk about being an athlete, being an
Yeah.
entrepreneur. Those are some of those things that shape us when
Mm.
we're in situations throughout those experiences. Like being an athlete requires doing the dishes when you don't want
Yeah.
to, and maybe not
Yeah.
doing the dishes, but doing
Yeah.
something that you don't really want to do. And by golly, I should get a pass on this.
Mm-hmm.
But then my competition is going to have one step up
Mm-hmm.
on me because they didn't take a pass.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you look back on some of those scenarios and with pride, or how do you view those things in the context of the past? Like when you had to do things that, like I wouldn't have thought your parents were bad parents if they would let you sit on the couch and not do the dishes,
I'm
but do you look back on those and like with just pride, or like how do you view those things looking back on them?
not sure that I would use the word pride, but I
Hmm.
definitely see them as valuable,
Yeah.
valuable experiences,
Yeah.
again, that
Okay.
have shaped me to be who I am.
Hmm.
If there's a negative to it, then I guess that you could say it's because sometimes I look at others and judge them through my eyes, which is,
Hmm.
they always say your greatest strength can also be your greatest weakness.
Hmm.
And if I feel like somebody's taken that pass and they should toughen up
Yeah. Yeah.
and, just do it, well, it might not be the right answer for them in that
Hmm.
situation. But I
Yeah.
look through the filter. Well, by golly, when I was 12, I did dishes with a
Yeah.
broken leg, kind of like
Right.
you hear the stories of parents that says, well, when I was a kid, I walked to school 2 miles in, 2 feet of snow barefoot.
Both ways.
Yeah, both ways. We come
Uphill.
up with these great stories. And so I guess if it's a weakness, I'll judge people according to that standard when it's not fair. But it
Hmm.
was definitely for me a valuable
Hmm.
part of who I am
Hmm.
in going the extra mile when it was necessary
Hmm.
and being able to push myself to succeed.
Yeah. talk to me about skiing and the kids that were popular on campus. Was that high school when?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, my high school had a ski club. Now, first of all, I never really pictured myself as a skier. My family didn't ski. We were
Mm-hmm.
snowmobilers,
Oh, okay.
believe it or not. So I love to be outside in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
But at my high school, a lot of the popular kids were skiers, and there was a ski club. And so every Friday during the wintertime, the big luxury liner bus would pull up to the front of the school, and all the kids would be so excited all throughout the day. You
Mm-hmm.
knew who the skiers were because they brought all their gear, and it didn't fit in the locker. So they lined the hall with all of the skis and boots and whatnot. But you knew for sure who those kids were because they wore lift tickets on their jackets.
Mm-hmm.
Back in those days, a lift ticket was connected to your zipper by
Mm-hmm.
a wire wicket,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a U-shaped piece of wire with a paper ticket
Mm-hmm.
that's stuck on there. And by golly, nobody would ever cut those things off because, you didn't just want one lift ticket dangling from your zipper. You wanted like 20 of them so people could see how many times you'd been skiing that, at least wearing that jacket.
Yeah.
So, it was warm in the school, but kids would wear their jacket all day long, I think, just so they could dangle those lift tickets. And I really wanted a lift ticket. And so I decided that I wanted to learn how to ski on one leg, and it was challenging to find somebody who could teach me. We started making phone calls and leaving, name and phone number all around at different ski areas and different organizations. And finally, one day, out of the blue, at least that's what it seemed like, I got a call from a woman named Jan. And this was my senior year in high school, actually. So it took us quite a while to
Really?
find an instructor. She was also a person with one leg, and she said, "Would you like to learn how to ski?" It's like, yeah, you
Yeah.
bet.
Yeah,
So
I've been calling people. So
yeah,
yeah,
and I want a lift
I'm
ticket really
interested.
bad. So let's go skiing. So I get my lift ticket. That's really all I cared about at the time. And then
Yeah.
I didn't even get a lift ticket on my first day of skiing because we didn't go
That
up the chairlift. And I was
yeah.
very disappointed by that.
And you learned a very important lesson that day, didn't you? Can you talk to us about the lesson you learned?
Yeah, absolutely. I told you I was disappointed I didn't get a lift ticket. So she showed
Yeah.
me how to put on my boot and use these things called outriggers, which on one leg, instead of using regular ski poles, they were like four-arm crutches with a sawed-off ski tip mounted on the end.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still called outriggers. And so those are what I use instead of poles. And then I just had my ski, regular boot, and then those. And I mean, just putting the equipment on is quite a challenge because it's bulky and it's heavy. But I was raring to go. And I says, when
Yeah.
do I get my lift ticket? And she
Yeah.
says, well, you're not going to get a lift ticket today because we're just going to hang out over here on this little bunny slope, and you don't need a lift ticket for that. I go, great. She says, the first thing we're going to learn is how to fall. And I'm like, I don't need to learn how to fall. I already know that. I mean, I've had one leg my entire life. I can tell you I am an expert at falling. And she says, well, here's what you need to understand about skiing. You must learn how to fall safely so that you don't get hurt when you do fall. So she says, we're going to work on falling, and even more importantly, learning how to get back up.
Yeah.
Because falling was the easy part. I said I was good at it, and believe me, I was. I fell all day long, but getting back up, by the end of the day, my get up muscles were weak. And getting up was really challenging. And I realized that on that day, that learning how to fall safely is probably one of the most important lessons in skiing. But strengthening your get up muscles is right up there along with it. And I've been able to apply this, I think, just about everything in my entire life. Because I equate falling oftentimes with failure.
Yeah.
Or at the very least of running into a hiccup, a setback, an obstacle, something that is unexpected that comes our way or gets thrown into our path. And it can knock us down, right? It knocks us down or knocks us back a bit. And we get to get back up and get back in the game and keep going. And sometimes that's the hardest part because our get up muscles are weak.
Yeah.
So we get to learn how to strengthen our get up muscles along the way, just as I got to do in skiing. So I could get up and try it all over again.
I want to focus on that for a second here because many of our guests and our audience that are listening to our guests talk about this resiliency to get back up, to fall and get back up, and fall and get back up, and fall and
Yeah.
get back up. And you're talking about something that applies not only obviously to skiing, but to, many athletes who are falling, whether they're still playing, right? And they're
Hmm.
trying to work on their game and they're trying to improve their game, or the jerseys come off now and now they're starting a new sport, which is called the corporate world or entrepreneurship. And falling it feels very different than what it felt like when you were at a sport, because you could redeem yourself very quickly in sports. Whereas sometimes in the corporate world or the career world, it's a little bit of a longer journey to figure out how to get back up and things like that. So, can you talk about like how to strengthen your get back up muscle?
Yeah. Well, there's lots of ways. And obviously, there's times when we fall and we can't get back up.
Yeah.
Like that day, I broke my knee ice skating, I told you
Yeah.
about.
Hmm.
So it requires maybe a delayed get back up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I recently fell and broke my elbow just,
Hmm.
a month ago. And even though I got back up, I realized I was damaged along the
Mm.
way and had to go
Hmm.
through a period of healing and recovery.
Hmm.
So it's not always possible to just bounce right back up
Hmm.
and get back up. So we use these skills that we have to be able to adapt and to be able, you talked about resilience, and
Hmm.
resilience is this idea of being able to recover from a
Yeah.
setback or
Yeah.
get up after a fall or bounce back.
Hmm.
And really to prepare for this is so many qualities that I've
Hmm.
seen in a lot of my friends with disabilities. You
Hmm.
see them doing this on a daily basis as they overcome
Hmm.
their disability, whatever it was, or
Yeah.
adapt.
Hmm.
And I think it's kind of a daily practice.
Mm.
Resiliency is a daily practice. It's a practice when things don't look the way we think they should. How are
Mm.
we going to respond to that?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges because we think it should be this way
Yeah.
and it's not. And I don't care if it's the little things. For example, I'm trying to think of a really brilliant example right in this moment, and I'm stumped.
That's okay.
I'll use a really great example. My daughter is getting married
Hmm.
in a few weeks,
Yeah.
and she just found out that the state of Oregon has reinstated their mask mandate.
Yeah.
So for the reception, people are going to have to wear masks
Hmm.
inside. And she was really devastated by this because she
Yeah.
was very happy when there was no mask mandate because at
Hmm.
weddings, there's pictures.
Yeah.
So in that moment, she got to realize it's not going to look the way I want it to.
Hmm.
So now what can we do to make it look really cool and
Yeah.
really fun? How can we
Yeah.
wear masks and make
Hmm.
this an exciting event and
Yeah.
add to it rather than be so devastated that people have to wear masks when they go into the reception?
Yeah.
So this is how we learn resilience. When these
Mm.
things come along, we tell ourselves a new story. It's a term I call re-story.
Mm.
So instead of saying wearing a mask is awful and I hate this, tell yourself a story of wearing a mask can be really fun
Hmm.
and we can be goofy and have gold sparkly masks or
Yeah.
do something different. Tell
Yeah.
yourself a new story.
Hmm.
So I think re-story
Yeah.
is one great practice that we can implement
Hmm.
every day when
Hmm.
things just don't look the way we want them to.
Hmm.
What's a new story that I can tell myself? And some people will say, well, that's just lying to yourself. Well, not really, because for any story we tell ourselves becomes our truth,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So we tell ourselves a story that empowers us.
Yeah.
And I think that it becomes our truth just as much as
Hmm.
something that's highly negative, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So restory, that's one great skill to practice and learn.
Was that something you always did, you think? Or is it something that along the way you noticed that you did it, or you noticed it as a strategy and started to implement it in your life?
It's a little bit of both. I think I've always been more of a positive person. I
Mhm.
hate to put this restory idea into this idea of being positive versus being negative, because
Yeah.
I think it's so much more than that. But I've
Oh
always
yeah.
been somewhat of a positive person
Yeah, yeah.
and
Okay.
tried to look at life of how can I make this work? How can I make
Mhm.
this happen?
Mhm.
Which is all part of the whole idea of restory.
Yeah.
But in my lifetime, I've done a lot of personal growth
Mhm.
work with coaches
Mhm.
and through seminars and through my own spiritual beliefs
Mhm.
and practices that I've learned it as well
Yeah.
and begun to practice it. So when I
Mhm.
find myself with a story that just doesn't serve me, that I keep playing over and
Mhm.
over in my mind, I get to
Mhm.
stop
Mhm.
and decide. That's the other,
Yeah.
decide, do I want to change this?
Yeah.
And say, okay, what's a better story
Mhm.
that I can have around this situation
Mhm.
that will work
Yeah.
and allow me to get where I'm going to go. And it may not look the way I thought it should. And the thing about my skiing was, is as a child wanting to be an Olympic athlete, I never once imagined or even saw myself as being a skier.
Hmm.
I saw myself as being a gymnast or being an ice
Mm.
skater or being something. I
Mhm.
call them the pretty sports. And which is kind of funny. I laugh because I don't think that I would be very good at any of those things. But I became a skier. It didn't look like the
Yeah.
way I thought I would. I
Yeah.
wanted to be in the Olympics. I became a Paralympic athlete.
Yeah.
It didn't look like the way I thought it would. And yet it was incredible experience, even
Talk to
better than what I thought.
Can you share with us what your journey was like going from, because you got started skiing as a senior in high school,
Right.
and then what happened after that? Because what's the connection between high school and then becoming this Paralympic gold medalist?
Yeah. Well, here's the good news about at the time, particularly individuals with disabilities who are athletes. There's less of them
Hmm.
than non-disabled individuals who are athletes.
Mm.
So I was
Mhm.
competing in a much smaller pool of athletes, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I was able to learn to ski and begin to train full time, which is something I really wanted to do because I
Mhm.
entered my first race 2 years after I learned how to ski. And I'm telling you, I did not ski very well.
Mm.
It was a race that was a regional race, but they broke it down into divisions for beginners. It
Mhm.
was like beginner skiers and more advanced skiers. And so I was racing against other beginner, one-legged skiers.
Mhm.
And I ended up winning this race.
Mm.
And I was so good at losing that I couldn't imagine winning anything. I was so surprised when I came in first. And I always laughed that I was the best of the worst skiers because it was beginners. So
Mhm.
we were all pretty bad skiers. My goal was really just to stay standing and not fall
Yeah.
down during the race. Even though I was good at it, I didn't want to fall during the race.
Yeah.
So I managed to stay standing and win. It put that desire in my heart to be a ski
Mm.
racer. So I
Mhm.
found a coach who was able to start teaching me how to ski better and race, and hung out with other racers, which is really important to surround yourself with people who, are doing what you want to do.
Mhm.
And I started going to training camps for disabled skiers. I was in college at the time. I decided when I graduated from college, I was going to begin to train full time and
Mhm.
be very serious athlete.
Mm.
And so that's what I did. I moved to Winter Park, Colorado. They had a competition program for disabled skiers, and I jumped into that and began to move up.
Mm.
At first I
Mhm.
was always last, skiing with
Mhm.
some of the really best skiers in the world,
Yeah.
and coming in last and started moving up through the ranks.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll tell you, I don't think I would, people that think back to that era of time would never think of me as one of the really great one-legged skiers. I can name a few who I think are, and that didn't even matter. I still won my gold medal and my bronze medals.
Yeah.
So you don't always have to be the greatest and the best to
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
victory.
Yeah.
And it's totally shaped my life since then, because
Mm.
all the same skills that I used when I was racing and trying to
Mhm.
win medals
Mhm.
are skills that I've used in my business
Yeah.
and things that I've been able to apply as I've grown my business.
Yeah. I love that. How long did you ski after, from the time that you finished high school? Like how long was your skiing career?
My ski career was 10 years.
Oh, okay. All
Like I
right.
said, it's unheard of for a
Yeah.
non-disabled person to be able
Yeah.
to learn to ski and rise through the ranks and go to the ultimate event, right?
Yeah.
It probably would never happen with a two-legged person.
Right.
But again, the pool was smaller with
Hmm.
the individuals with disabilities, and it made it
Hmm.
possible because I had one leg. I always say I was successful in that, not in spite of my leg, but because of it.
Hmm.
And that I hear that term gets used quite a bit. And I always say that I made it up, but people copied me, but probably not.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I was in a unique position to be
Yeah.
able to learn and grow in the sport very
Hmm.
quickly.
Hmm.
And I am so grateful for that
I
because
love
it was
that.
an
Yeah.
incredible experience to be able to train full time, be a full time athlete,
Hmm.
travel around the world and race and be in the Paralympics. Having that experience is
Hmm.
something that was beyond anything I could have imagined when I was a kid.
Hmm. Hmm.
It was better than I could
Yeah.
have imagined.
Wow. That's so good. Thank you for sharing that. What was your transition like after being done with skiing?
Well, I quit racing in 1992 after that ski season ended with the
Hmm.
Paralympics.
Hmm.
And it was a dumb year to retire
Mm.
from racing because
Mm.
that was the time when they split the Winter Olympics and the Summer Olympics. They used to be every 4 years in the same year. And they
Mm.
decided to have the Winter Olympics and then 2 years later, the Summer Olympics, and then 2 years later,
Mm.
the Winter Olympics. So that
Mhm.
they were going to start 2 years later in 1994
Yeah.
of having the Winter Olympics in Lillehammer,
Mm.
Norway.
Mm.
So that was not a good year to retire because you only had to wait 2 more years for the
Mhm.
next Olympics when ordinarily you'd have to wait 4 more years, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But I was ready to start my family
Yeah.
and actually was pregnant with my son, who's my oldest child, who's
Mhm.
now actually 28 years old.
Oh,
So
wow.
that tells you how long ago this was.
Yeah.
I was pregnant in the
Yeah.
Paralympics. And so I was ready to move into starting my family.
Yeah.
And I had 3 kids in 5 years. And then I started my business in the middle of having children.
Mm.
And so I very quickly moved from being a person who could hop on a plane and go anywhere I wanted to go to taking care of babies and having a responsibility of a business.
Yeah. Right there seems like that could be a TV show or a book just in and of itself. Because hats off, having children is, its own challenge. And then a business on top of that is, as well. So
Yeah, and you don't get medals for it either. Isn't
I
it funny? I
know.
mean,
Yeah.
I'd have to say, as far as the satisfaction level, I mean, I had a lot of fun ski racing and it was
Hmm.
certainly very rewarding.
Yeah.
Having children was beyond even that, right? Being a mom,
Yeah.
and yet nobody gives you medals.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
struggling, you're working hard, you're doing everything. And, you go to bed at night and don't know if you even did a good job that day.
Yeah.
Ski racing's great because it's time, right? You have a
Yeah.
run, you go as fast as you can, and you get to
Yeah.
the bottom, and you know if you had a really good run or if you had a really slow run because the
Yep.
time tells all.
Yep.
And motherhood is not like that. There's no
Yeah.
measurements to say, "Wow, you won this one." No,
Hmm.
you lost that one.
That's so true. What was it like picking a business? You mentioned that you started a business during that time too. Can
Yeah.
you talk to us about how you found a business that you wanted to build?
Yeah, I kind of fell into it by mistake. My family was in the ready mix concrete business.
Okay.
Won't say by mistake. I'll say by accident.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't seeking to start a business, but my family was in the ready mix concrete business, and we decided to build a brand new business from scratch that focused on environmentally friendly chemical cleaners for heavy duty industrial,
Mm-hmm.
and put together a product line. I was designated as the person who would kind of lead up this project of
Yeah.
ours.
Mm-hmm.
Went out into the field and began calling on industrial customers for these environmentally friendly chemicals. People would hear the word environmental and they would wonder, they would start asking us about, well, how do I clean up a spill? Because cleaning up spills was becoming important. It was becoming regulated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I realized very quickly that there was much more demand for spill cleanup, at least in our
Mhm.
community, than there was for these environmentally friendly chemical cleaners, where there was quite a bit of competition already in the market
Yeah.
for that.
Mhm.
So we shifted gears and began putting spill kits together for the trucking industry, because I had new trucks. We had a fleet of
Mhm.
trucks that delivered concrete. And people that didn't have a catastrophic spill necessarily, but had to clean it up anyway, whether
Mhm.
it was just to please a homeowner because the truck left a little puddle of oil in their driveway,
Yeah.
or because it broke down alongside of the freeway and,
Yeah.
some hydraulic fluid ran into the ditch alongside the
Yeah.
road.
Mhm.
It was much more demand,
Yeah.
new demand,
Mhm.
very much just beginning to become an issue. So we
Yeah.
jumped into that type of industry and kind of grew from there and learned along the way. So I always say it was kind of like one thing led to another. It wasn't
Mm.
sitting
Mhm.
down, what should we do to start a business and have this
Mhm.
beautiful business plan? It was more like, got an idea, going to go out and start working on it and see what happens with it. And that's kind of what happened. It shaped the industry, shaped what we did and who we became.
Hmm. I love that aspect of your story because I think there's so much right now for athletes that talks about being intentional about planning. And I really believe in being intentional about planning when it
So do
comes
I.
to like what you actually want to do. But I also believe in flexibility, right? Like I work in the payments industry now and I had zero interest in it whatsoever, but I think I was flexible at the time that it came along
Yeah.
and it turned into something where I have passion for it. But it but if I would have been intentional about it, I don't think that I even would have thought that this was an opportunity for me. You know?
Yeah.
What do you think from your perspective, especially since you've been successful in business now for when did you start environment?
1995.
1995. So you've been
Yeah.
in business for a while.
A few years.
Yeah. So in terms of the athletes that are now, tasked with potentially starting a business while they're in college or now after college, what are some of the important principles you'd like to pass along to them that they should think about before starting one?
Well, I think that it's important for them to know that they already have the skills of, I call it stick to itiveness,
Mm-hmm.
determination, working hard,
Mm-hmm.
training in the form of utilizing those who are wiser
Mm-hmm.
and maybe more skilled in a certain area to
Mm-hmm.
create those skills that we need to
Mm-hmm.
develop in our business, or hire somebody to, to step into that role.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, is really important. So they already have this idea of what it takes. And I think that we could talk money, because starting a business always takes more money
Yeah.
than you realize, whether you buy somebody's business and have to
Mm-hmm.
pay them for it, or you start a business from scratch thinking you're going
Yeah.
to save having to pay somebody else. You're just going to have to pay it somehow. It's important to have some kind of money to sustain you for a length of time that it's going to take to get things off the ground.
Yeah.
That's absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm.
I But more than anything, sometimes athletes are used to often getting accolades, like we talked about the medals
Mm-hmm.
with motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when you start your own business, you don't get any accolades. It can be a
Yeah.
very, at first,
Yeah.
lonely. You're out working really hard and you don't necessarily see any rewards coming in right away for
Yeah.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you don't even make as much money in your own business as you
Yeah.
might if you went out and got a job. And so it's easy to think, well, I should turn in the towel and give this
Mm-hmm.
up and just go take a salary somewhere and make more
Yeah.
money. It's
Yeah.
kind of being willing to sacrifice being in the limelight,
Yeah.
sacrifice maybe making a bigger salary,
Yeah.
because who knows.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is really important though. My mother always taught me, she's my mentor. She's an incredible businesswoman. She says, you can work really hard and make a lot of money,
Yeah.
and you can work really hard and make a little bit of money.
Yeah.
So my advice to anybody that's thinking about starting their own business is look at what the income potential is for your industry or for that specific business and decide, am I willing to give this 100% and more to make that level? Or is there
Oh,
another
yeah.
product or thing I can jump into that has more
Mhm.
income potential? That's a real
Mhm.
practical advice to look at
Mhm.
as far as
Mhm.
somebody who wants to start their own business. I can't tell you how many times when my business was young and we had some real big challenges that were financially draining the company.
Mm-hmm.
And I was struggling through those times when I would go through Burger King to get a lunch and there would be a help wanted sign on the window at Burger King. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking at that in my car going, wow, I think maybe I should go apply. No,
Especially right now, they're
I'm not saying
the
there's anything wrong with working
$1,000
at Burger
bonuses.
King. Yeah,
Yeah.
Burger King's paying really good. They weren't back then.
Yeah.
That I was a little desperate. So you get to have the stuff it takes to get through those moments when you're desperate, when you're struggling, because the corners can turn just the next day. You never know what's coming up or what's coming around.
What do you think kept you from jumping ship though? Because I think there's a period of time. Seth Godin talks about the dip. I don't know if you follow Seth Godin at all, but he talks about the dip. It's like when you start something, you're super fired up, you're excited. We're all going to be rich. It's going to be huge. And then and then the dip happens. And the dip is you go off a cliff, and you're
Yeah.
down in the valley. And in the valley is where it's like you have to survive the dip to where you can get
Right.
out of the valley and get to the other side of it. But there's that period of time where it could be 2-3 years
Yeah.
and you're in this place where you're making way less money than what your talents or what you could go get from a corporation. What do you think? Like, why didn't you jump ship during that dip when you're
Well,
sitting in that drive-through?
there's a couple of reasons. One, I'm really a stubborn person and just determined to prove that I can do this. Right.
Yeah.
That was a big driver, and maybe unwise at moments. And I can't say that there is not a good time to jump ship. Right there, that's everybody has to look at their own. For me, I'm a very spiritual person.
Yeah.
So I believe in some kind of guidance from a higher power.
Yeah.
And I felt honestly in my heart that the timing was not right for me to quit. So that was important to me. And I think, oh boy, as well, there's just, my dad told me, he says, make a list of the benefits of staying with it and the benefits of getting out of it. And so I was able to do this kind of a list. I had 3 children that were young, and I wanted to be able to be a mother to them. And I could bring them to work with me sometimes. It wasn't ideal all the time because it's hard to work with 3 kids running around. But I had a little bit more flexibility owning my own business than I would if I was working in the corporate world.
Yeah.
So that was a big driver for me, was maintaining my own flexibility in that. I still was working super hard, but I also, if one of my kids had a school assembly, I could leave and go to their school assembly. So that was a big deal for me. That weighed very heavily in the stick with it column.
Yeah.
So that, I think everybody's got to do that. They've got to find out what is most important to them. And kind of those things that make up for perhaps taking a lower salary for a period of time. Balance that out and decide what's important to me. Is this business potentially going to take me where I want to go? But knowing where you want to go, what it looks like is really helpful.
That's really important. I really appreciate the fact that you're highlighting that, because it's not just saying, oh, hey, I would just want to make, $225,000 a year. For you, it's also, what are the other things that are really, really, really important? Like being able to pick up your child at 2:00 in the afternoon and take them somewhere for ice cream or to a recital or something else, maybe with the doctor or things like that, and being able to do that and keep the 225 as well. Like you can do
it doesn't
that
have
when
to
you own
be
your
an
own
either
business.
or. But know what is most important, at least in those situations.
Yeah. I love that. Thanks for highlighting that and sharing that. I also want to talk just really briefly about, I know there's parents that are out there, maybe they're current athletes, maybe they're former athletes, maybe they're not even athletes, but I think there's an important aspect of your story that I think you can speak to. Parents that have kids that have disabilities. what advice would you give to parents that are facing that challenge? We've had, a lot of different, whether it's Asperger's or just different things that
Mhm.
are just, I think, more commonplace than they were 30 years ago, that parents are facing in dealing with athletics. Do you have any advice for those parents?
Yeah, I can't speak from a parent as far
Yeah.
as having a child with a disability, but being
Yeah.
a child with a disability, the
Hmm.
best advice I can give to parents is just treat your children like kids.
Yeah.
Treat them
Yeah.
like, I use the word normal roughly because we really
Yeah.
don't know what normal means,
Yeah.
but just treat them like you would treat any other kid. They want to
Yeah.
be loved, they want to be accepted, and don't I guess find that balance between pushing them and allowing
Yeah.
them to grow at their own rate,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
allow them to run with what they think is best for them. Kids, finding out what's most important to the kid and what really
Mm.
motivates them and gets them excited
Hmm.
is really helpful to the kids. I think parents tend to coddle kids a little
Yeah.
bit that have a disability.
Yeah.
Maybe it's time to just push them up to the sink and let
Hmm.
them do the dishes when it's their turn.
Amen. Amen. As we close up the show today, I want to give you the opportunity. Today's, a class that you're going to teach to a group of entrepreneurs or a group of athletes that are thinking about entrepreneurs. What's the one piece of advice that you want them to take away from today's conversation?
Oh, wow. Great question. Well, I've already talked about it doesn't have to look like the way you wanted it to look.
Hmm.
But I think the biggest advice I can give is really, though, even though it may not look like you want it to look,
Hmm.
have a clear picture in your mind of what you do want.
Yeah.
It kind of seems like they don't go together, right?
Yeah.
How can you allow the story to look differently, but have a clear picture in your mind of how it looks? Because ski racing is awesome. It's got a finish line. They draw a
Mhm.
line in the snow so that when you cross over that finish line,
Yeah.
you know that you've achieved that race.
Yeah.
You finished that race.
Hmm.
And when we set a goal
Hmm.
in our either a corporate life or a business that we're starting, it's really important to know where that line is.
Hmm.
So when we cross it, we can
Mm.
celebrate. When we
Yeah.
cross it, we can know that we've achieved this.
Hmm.
Now, it may not look like we thought it should
Yeah.
along the way, particularly.
Yeah.
We get sidetracked, things go this way, they go that way. But if we know at least where we're headed, we can continue to
Yeah.
move towards it and we can
Yeah.
celebrate when we get there.
Yeah.
And then if we want to set a new line,
Yeah.
a new goal and move
Yeah.
towards it, then we can
Yeah.
do that. But at least have a clear picture of what
Yeah.
we want it to look like.
Yeah. And when we get there, we can restory.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I will make sure that I place your information in the show notes, including your website and all your social media channels. And look forward to staying in touch and having you on the show again sometime in the future.
Well, thank you. It's really been fun to be here. Thank you for having me.
You got it. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah.